That should tell you everything you need to know right now. The President of the United States thinks cutting the shutdown will be good politically for him. So there it is. That should tell you everything you need to know right now. The President of the United States thinks shutting down the federal government is a good thing for him. So we'll talk about that. But before we do, we're going to get into this very interesting story. Again, a headline that's not being covered too much because of all the other breaking news. House Republicans are looking to bring gun legislation to the floor that would increase conceal and carry rights to citizens around the country. The plan, known as the Concealed Carry Reciprocity Act of 2017, would basically allow licensed gun owners to carry their firearms in other states that have their own concealed carry laws. The bill also would allow gun owners to bring a firearm to any state, as long as they have a permit, a photo ID, and follow that state's gun laws. Now, I don't know how that would work if the state doesn't really kind of permit you to have a gun, but we'll talk about that. And to help us talk about that is Tim Schmidt. Tim Schmidt is the president and founder of the United States Concealed Carry Association. Welcome, Tim, to Steele and Ungar. Great to have you on, man.
Hey, guys. Appreciate being on here. Michael, Rick, great to be here.
Absolutely. So I kind of set it up for you. Why don't you take it from there? What does this bill look to do? Is it really as simple as just allowing a gun owner to bring their firearm into a state, regardless of whether that state has a concealed carry law on the books, as long as they have a proper permit, photo ID, and are willing to abide by those states' gun laws?
Yeah, well, I mean, that's a great way to preface it, and ultimately it's simple but complex at the same time, in the sense that right now, every single one of our states has different concealed carry legislation. They have different concealed carry requirements, and unfortunately, all the states don't recognize each other's permits. I mean, certainly there's some that do. There's all sorts of reciprocity complications, and quite frankly, it's a hassle. And ultimately what this bill does is it sets it up so that people can get a concealed carry permit in their state and be able to travel wherever they want, just like they do with a driver's license. And so from my perspective, it makes a lot of sense because, ultimately, the ability to carry a gun and protect your family and your loved ones, it's a natural born right. And if you can do that in the state you live in, you should be able to do that wherever you want.
But okay, so that's fine. I understand that. But let's say in my state, you're able to own a gun and go through the proper processes, but we don't have concealed carry here for reasons that the citizens of the state have decided through their legislature that that's a bridge too far for us. We don't want that. We want you can own it keep it in your home. Great, no problem. But we don't want you checking into hotels with one. We don't want you showing up at restaurants with one.
Sure.
We don't want you standing in line at the liquor store with one. So why should our rights to limit that be usurped by the federal government?
Understood, and that's why this bill had so much controversy, because so probably 35 to 37 states in the U.S. completely recognize that citizens' ability to protect their loved ones with a firearm,
right?
And quite frankly, that's a natural born right that's affirmed by the Second Amendment. And so just because 10 to 12 states don't recognize that, I mean, honestly, you guys aren't recognizing the Constitution. So from my perspective, I think this is a great way to, I hate to use the word.
Did you just say we don't recognize the Constitution?
How do we not recognize the Constitution?
Because the United States Constitution has a Second Amendment which affirms the natural born right of self-defense. It affirms.
Wait a minute. But no, the Constitution says nothing about concealed carry. The Constitution says nothing about what I just described in those scenarios.
We also know the states have the right to make up their own rules, and the states with different rules.
Right. So the states have the ability to define if what you just said were true, then every state in the union would have what you're described, because the Constitution would require it. But that's not how this works. The 10th Amendment makes sure that the states reserve to themselves the ability to make decisions on matters like this up to those constitutional limits. So it's not that the Constitution is not recognized, it's that the Constitution allows the states to say, yes, we know you have a right to own a gun, okay? And we want to set limits on where you can carry that gun, or we want to set limits on how you get access to that gun. We're not saying that you can't have it. You just have to, show an ID. You've got to get a permit or whatever. So how is getting a permit not infringing the Second Amendment, but a state saying, well, you just can't have it at a restaurant does?
Okay, fair enough. I'll grant you that. I mean, I guess from one perspective, I would argue that, if you could say that you can exercise the First Amendment in one spot and not in another spot, are you really allowed
That's true. I can't yell fire in the theater. We know that. So I can't exercise my First Amendment right there. I got that. Come on, dude. We know that there are limits on the Constitution.
Than that.
Come on.
Yeah.
And look, and I'm a Second Amendment supporter, so don't get me twisted on this. But but I'm also a big fan of the 10th Amendment and the fact that we're a republic and states ultimately get to decide through their citizen legislatures what it is that they're willing to live with, up to, not violating the Constitution, and not allowing me to carry a gun in my state does not violate the Constitution. You need to tell me how it does.
Okay, fair enough. Well, let me try this angle, guys. You guys are shutting me down at every angle I'm going with. What about this one? So since 1987, when Florida passed concealed carry, state after state has passed these same legislations, and crime goes down. The good people have the guns. The criminals get nervous about this. So doesn't this make sense to allow responsibly armed citizens to be able to carry in any place that they travel to? Because ultimately, concealed carry lowers crime. It does a better job of reducing crimes, of making the criminals really think twice about, do I really want to commit this crime? So I mean, from that perspective, I mean, how are you going to argue against that?
So let me ask you this, Tim.
I'll leave that one to Rick.
I'm just going to put it in another direction. Let me ask you this, Tim. Listen. I respect. I read a lot of the material on you, so I would have a better understanding of where you're coming from. And you put a lot of your feelings, very understandably, and you've actually mentioned it a few times here, on the personal responsibility that you feel you have and you take to protect yourself and your family. Correct?
Of course. Yes, sir.
Okay, so here's my question. I take that responsibility importantly as an important thing too. It's important to me to protect my family. I can respect why you, and given your point of view, would choose to live in a state that allows you to have concealed carry and maybe other fairly liberal gun laws. I get it, and you should absolutely have that right to pick a state to live in that has that. But see, to me, I do a better job protecting my family when I pick a state that fewer people can have guns because it's tougher for them to get them. So aren't you kind of infringing on, I choose to live in a state like New York because I think my family will be safer. Aren't you infringing when you're allowed to bring your gun into my state because you're allowed to have it in your state? Aren't you infringing on my opportunity to do what I think is best to protect my family?
Okay, so Rick, it's a well put out argument. I completely understand what you're saying, but respectfully, sir, I have to tell you that, I mean, I guarantee you that my family and my kids are safer in Wisconsin than they are in New York. I mean, are you kidding me? New York, Chicago, these are the places that have the worst levels of crime, and it's the places that have the highest levels of gun control. And, I mean, don't get me wrong, guys. I mean, certainly...
But you don't know my neighborhood. You don't know where I live. Say, Tim, and you don't know how low the crime is where I'm sitting.
You're projecting. So, for example, I live in Maryland, okay, and I live specifically in Prince George's County, and I live in the capital seat of Prince George's County, and there's also Baltimore City.
Okay.
And Baltimore City has a very different crime environment and problem than we have or we see here in Prince George's County. The problem I have with your argument where you say I'm safer in Wisconsin than you are in New York, well, that's just not true because New York is a big state. I would say upstate New York, crime is very different than it is in New York City. And within New York City, it's very different depending on which borough you're in. So the idea of projecting more broadly, to Rick's point, is sort of facetious because Rick can choose to live in a state that, and within that state, areas of that state that are more secure. And don't have the quote rampant crime record that you may see in a place like big urban center.
And let me add to that, Tim. Tim, let me add one thing, and then certainly you can respond. And here's what troubles me about your answer. You may be absolutely right when you point out that Wisconsin is overall safer than New York. You could be absolutely right, but don't I still have that right to make that decision? That the same as you do. You make a decision to live where you live because it allows you to do what you think is best in protecting your family. I completely respect that right of yours. Yeah. But I should have that right too. And if I live in a neighborhood, as I do, that happens to be remarkably safe, I'm not worried about Tim driving down the street with a gun in your pocket. I'm sure you're a responsible, sensible guy. But there are people I would be worried about. And I just think that my state should, I should get the benefit of the decisions I've made with respect to what my state does and not have to live with your state's decisions. Yeah.
And Rick, that's a great point. And Michael, what you said makes sense to me as well. I completely understand what you're saying. And you guys are right. For me to compare Midwestern, middle of nowhere, Wisconsin to New York City, maybe that's not so fair. I guess let me just try one more time, guys. And ultimately it comes down to this. It comes down to you can pass as many gun laws as you want. You can, create concealed carry, as difficult or easy as it is. And ultimately, at the end of the day, the people that are going to follow these laws are going to be the good guys. And no matter what laws you pass, the bad guys are going to completely ignore it. So ultimately, these different laws that we pass, it only affects the good guys. And so why wouldn't we want to make it easier for the good guys to have guns, for the good guys to be able to stop the crimes? Because at the end of the day,
you're not speaking to our argument, Tim, because I get your point. I've certainly heard it lots of times, and I get the logic of what you're saying. Okay. But it's still infringing on my right. If I want to spend a ton of money, and I do, to live in a neighborhood where there's way less likelihood of there being in a gun, then my decision is going to be live in a state that makes it way less likely and pay that money to live in that neighborhood. Okay. So I just don't understand. I mean, I don't get to come to your state and say, boy, I hate the way that you guys deal with guns here. You're way too lax. Who gives a damn what I think? I don't live in your state. It does matter what you think, because you do.
All right. Okay.
Why don't I get that same right?
Okay. Trust me, from the perspective of states' rights, there's nothing. I certainly understand your perspective. I guess for some reason, what trumps it for me is the fact that the gun isn't the problem. The guns don't cause crimes. The availability of guns don't cause crimes. Bad people
cause crimes.
Yeah, everything. So to your point about what we're talking about. Would you live in Milwaukee?
I live a little bit north of Milwaukee.
How about Brown Deer?
I've been there. Yeah, I go there. My kids go to school there.
Ashland? Oh, your kids go to school there? Okay.
Yes,
it's the second most violent place in Milwaukee? In Wisconsin?
Yeah, Brown Deer probably.
Yeah. Your kids go to school at Ashland, Wapaka, West Allis, Beloit, Racine, La Crosse, Superior, and Rice Lake. Those are the 10 most dangerous cities in your state. So
Michael's point is right on, because again, your whole thing, and I
wouldn't want to raise my kids in Wisconsin.
Right. If your thing is all about protecting your family, and God knows I appreciate that.
You send your kids to the second most dangerous city in Wisconsin, in the state of Wisconsin. Why are your kids there?
You guys did some good research. I'm impressed.
I'm just, dude.
Well, Tim, all due respect, you're here to defend a law going through Congress, and it really
That's
seems
gonna
like we did a
impinge
whole
on
lot more research than you have.
Right, it's going to impinge on my state's rights here. I'm just saying, if your argument is that you want to raise your family in a safe environment, check your backyard because it ain't that safe.
Hey, Tim, does your family have health insurance? I hope.
Of course we do. Yeah.
Okay. Well, a lot of families don't. And are you in favor of doing away with the mandate? You think that's an infringement of the government?
Dude, I think that any way the federal government gets involved in federal healthcare or our healthcare system is a horrible mistake.
Right, and yet there are 13 million families, if the mandate goes away, that won't have insurance. In other words, they won't be following your guide to taking care of your family. See, your whole premise is such a good premise. It really is. You know, when I read the stuff, I was impressed because your whole thing is coming from the point of view, my number one responsibility is to take care of myself and take care of my family. And I just completely got that. But it did make me want to start asking questions like, well, okay, then why don't you support other people who want to do the same thing? And you say the government this and the government that, but there are a lot more people out there who won't be able to take care of themselves and take care of their family. That violates your rule. If I make the decision, as we've discussed, or Michael makes the decision to live where we live because of the gun laws, you want to infringe on that, which makes me feel that I don't get to take care of my family in the way that I want to. I don't want to infringe on your right to take care of your family one little iota. You don't hear Michael, you don't hear me telling people to go take your guns away. I don't think they should.
So Tim,
but come on, what about us?
Where do you think this legislation is going? I know your association is advocating for it. It's working its way through the Congress. What do you think the prospects are? Where do you expect blowback? You got a little bit of it from us here, but and again, and I say that as someone who is very supportive of gun ownership, gun rights. I don't own a gun personally. I've made that personal choice, but I support you and all citizens like you who, stand, with their hands underneath the Second Amendment holding it up. But I kind of put even above that the 10th Amendment when it comes to the actions of Congress. And where do you see this? How do you see this thing playing out?
Well, first of all, I completely understand the 10th Amendment perspective, and quite frankly, I think the only thing that will save our republic is if we focus on states' rights. As to this legislation, I think it's going to make it through. I think that it's been stalled for a while, and now we're getting some traction, and I suspect it'll pass.
Do you know why it's been stalled? Is it just because of all the other stuff that's going on, or is there any resistance in the committee?
I mostly perceive that it's just news cycles and struggles with trying to push this stuff in the wake of some of the mass shootings. Yeah. But eventually it'll pass. And here's the thing that's going to happen, guys, is that this will pass, and the people that take advantage of this, you'll never hear about them. They're not going to cause problems. They're not going to cause, there's not going to be any mass shootings because of the people that actually have concealed carry permits and are in different states. And ultimately, they'll probably stop crimes. And I'll tell you this, guys: if I'm ever in Maryland or whatever the other state you guys live in,
New York,
and if I'm in New York, and if I'm carrying, I'm in a situation, I'm gonna protect you too.
Well, I
appreciate it, but we have police for that.
Yeah, that's why I call Prince George's County officers.
Do you think legislatively it's going to go through? I suspect you're right in the House of Representatives.
I think it dies in the Senate.
I think you're wrong about the Senate. It's not getting through the Senate.
I think it dies in the Senate, but I think you're right. It will pass the House. I think the Senate will go, hell no.
Yeah, we'll see.
But you know how those guys are in the Senate. Tim Schmidt, President and founder of the United States Concealed Carry Association. Look, Tim, we got your number now. We're going to get you back on as this thing progresses through. We'd love to get an update from you on how that's coming about.
Gentlemen, thank you very much. It was a pleasure to meet you.
You got it. Take care. All right, family and friends. When we come back into the neighborhood, we're going to break down each side's goal in averting or not averting a government shutdown. The Dems, the GOP.